So I've got 45 minutes or so this morning to talk to you all just about cost of the school day and some of the ways we've seen schools and the local authorities working to make a difference for children and families on low incomes using those kind of approaches. I do see a few familiar faces in the room, so I hope you'll excuse any repetition of my usual patter and it'll still be useful. Okay, so today I'm going to talk a wee bit, lots of it will be familiar to you, but just talk a wee bit about common financial barriers at school for children and families, the barriers that they report. I'm going to talk about the cost of the school day process and I guess how important I think it is that the whole school community is involved in any kind of approaches that schools are taking around reducing or removing costs. I'm going to look at sort of practically some of the useful strategies we've seen employed to overcome financial barriers and also talk a bit about what works to sustain it in the longer term. Show you some resources to support this kind of work in schools and then at the end show you just a short film that we've put together recently with children and young people talking about cost of the school day. Okay, so very briefly, lots of you'll know about the project itself or have been in touch or looked at the website or used resources or what have you. But I use this quote really often because I think it sums up exactly what it's all about really. We know, obviously, that low incomes can affect participation, can affect well-being at school. For children and young people, and I guess what Cost of the School Day is all about is finding out more about that from the perspective of the whole school community and looking at possible solutions to make sure that costs don't stand in the way of what children are able to do at school and costs aren't putting unnecessary financial pressures on families who are stretched in the first place. To help with that, we do a few bits and bobs at Child Poverty Action Group in Scotland, do direct work in schools in terms of action research, action planning, produce resources that I'll refer to later on, kind of advice, support, training, and also practice gathering and sharing because, you know, poverty in schools isn't a new issue. It's not something that's just come along recently. There are brilliant things going on already. There are brilliant things that are just getting started. And so a big role of Cost of the School Day isn't just about talking about barriers and problems. It's about saying actually what's happening that's working and how can we share that more widely. We are in the third year of a local authority-wide project in Dundee that I'll talk about a wee bit more later on. And we're about to start a partnership with Moray Council, or have started in fact, working with all of the schools in the Moray area. And we were really pleased to welcome last week the launch of an independent evaluation from NHS Health Scotland that showed that the programme is having an effect on attitudes in schools and on improving policies and practices at school and local authority level. So that's Cost of the School Day. You heard loads from John already on the bigger picture stuff, child poverty in Scotland, so I'm not going to dwell on this to any great extent. So yeah, I'm not going to dwell on this to any great extent, but I think kind of the key point based on what John was saying earlier, and I guess what I'll go on to say now, is that, you know, regardless of where you are in Scotland, there's going to be families, too many families, trapped in poverty and experiencing all of the negative things in the short term and the long term that brings. And I guess what that means is that there's no school in Scotland where consideration of income and its effects on children and families is going to be unnecessary either. I think what's I suppose worse about all of this is that child poverty levels are forecast to become worse in future years if action isn't taken. You can see the Scottish Government forecast there at the bottom. And I think it is really, really easy to feel powerless in the face of really grim statistics and forecasts. You know, but actually I think what we find, and what I think is really important to remember, is the sort of small practical actions throughout the school day which aim to reduce financial pressures on families can actually make a really, really huge difference. Let me try again. So I suppose for a child or a young person, a straightforward time at school would be to get to school without any difficulties in the morning, wear clothes that don't get them, you know, teased or bullied or picked on, and don't get them into any trouble from teachers. Be able to take part in school clubs, go on school trips, take part in special days, take part in non-uniform days, things like that if they're happening, eat lunch without any difficulties, have what they need to learn in the classroom, take the subjects they want at certificate level, feel safe, feel included, have friends, do the same things as them. Those are all things when we've spoken with children and young people about, you know, what would a straightforward day where you just went ahead and had a really straightforward time, what would that look like? And those are some of the things that children and young people say. But what we know from speaking with lots of children and young people over the course of this project is that there are a really varied range of costs throughout the school day that can get in the way of those sort of things happening. And some of them are small, some of them are really substantial, some of them are occasional, and some of them are actually every day if we're thinking about lunch and travel and so on. And again, what we know, when school costs are difficult or if they're impossible to afford, there's the risk that children and young people on low incomes miss out on learning, on wider achievement opportunities. You know, the same things that everyone else is doing, the same things that school is set up to make happen. And there's the risk that young people are feeling different, are feeling ashamed and feeling stigmatised, all feelings that have a really fundamental effect on how children experience school and on their well-being as a whole. And these are some examples here. You know, uniform, often there isn't enough or it isn't there, and that can lead to difference, to bullying, to trouble from teachers upholding the school uniform policy. Travelling to school, money for travel often isn't there. Attendance, late coming, all of the implications of that. Money to let young people stay back for supported studies or clubs or activities often isn't there. Eating at school. If you're hungry, you can't learn. And many children on low incomes are hungry at school. You know, breakfast clubs might not reach everyone. Free meal uptake, as we've spoken about a lot this morning already, isn't what it should be. And actually the families in work poverty often aren't eligible for free meals in the first place. That was something that wasn't mentioned in the previous discussion. The threshold for free meals is pretty low. And so there are a lot of families just above that who aren't able to receive that support. Friendships, we hear, you know, children and young people being very aware of income differences, seeing the effect that has on friendships, upfront or hidden costs of participating in clubs, societies, other activities can stop participation. Trips, you know, there will be trips, even cheap ones, that are often out with the realms of possibility. You know, young people tell us, why would we bother telling our parents about that? Of course we're not going to be going. And fun events, even really small costs for fun events can add up to be a problem. You know, discos, dress-up days, dress-down days, fundraising with the 20p's and the Smarty tubes, events with entry fees. And these are often completely optional, but what does it mean for families on tight budgets? And a major one here, a lot of the things we've spoken about are kind of, extras or kind of additional opportunities at school. But actually, there's quite a lot here about barriers to accessing the core curriculum for children that come down to cost. Craft projects where you supply your own materials, pens, pencils, calculators, past papers, homework that requires IT access, subject charges for design and technology, home economics, trips related to the curriculum. There's a range of costs with this and with everything across the school day. And if they are not reduced or removed, then there's the risk to learning. There's the risk that children and young people won't be engaging as they should be. So from the start to the end of the day, children and young people on low incomes are facing a range of challenges to their happiness, their sense of belonging and their participation. When we work sort of directly with schools, or if we're talking to schools who are wanting to go about this process and have a wee look at this a wee bit more closely, we sort of suggest the following process, and it's definitely not rocket science. It's just a process of talking to people and finding out what they think, but it's sometimes useful to set it out. So starting with that groundwork, getting a working group in a school, having that, we're talking about attitudes and values earlier, getting that kind of staff awareness and buy-in at the earliest stages, and then information gathering, an audit of costs throughout the school day, especially in larger schools, actually focusing in on how much does it cost to come to this school in an average week, in an average month, in an average year? How much are families being asked for? Because quite often there's different costs that are being asked for from maybe different departments or different classes or different parts of the school, and actually doing a really clear audit of that to get a bit of a baseline. After this, it's about getting staff views on costs, the barriers, the solutions. It's talking to children and young people about it. And parents and carers as well. So getting that really, really strong sense of, okay, well, what actually are the issues here? What do we want to focus on? The whole range of different barriers, the whole range of different costs that I spoke about earlier. Maybe we need to prioritise. What do we want to focus on? What's having the biggest impact, I suppose, on children's experiences? And from there, kind of putting together an action plan, however you want to look at that, kind of where are we, what do we know about the barriers, where do we want to get to, and involving those same groups, involving staff, involving pupils and involving parents and carers in coming up with some solutions around that. I'll just talk briefly about what some of the main reasons about involving children and parents, because I think it's really tempting and really understandable and sometimes really impactful for schools to dive into a solution and say kind of, right, okay, let's do this, let's try that. And often that's not a bad idea to do that, and you know the right solutions and it works. But one of the really big reasons, I think, to involve children and their parents in this sort of work is, first of all, as we've been talking about, SIMD and free meal data doesn't tell us everything. Most schools know their families really well and maybe know the families that require extra support. But actually, if the current tools that we have to help identify who needs help aren't good enough, then that's a real issue. And there's this really, really big thing of the extent to which poverty involves shame for people. It's huge. There's so much stigma, so much shame surrounding poverty. And that means that it is usually hidden. There's a lot of judgments, there's a lot of assumptions about it being people's own fault. And in that context, it takes a lot for a parent to put their hand up and say, you know, I can't afford this trip, but could you possibly look into doing something about that for me and providing some support? There's a lot there for parents to do that. I know it would take me absolutely... It would be really difficult if I suddenly lost my job and then had to approach my daughter's school. That would be a really big thing. So what we find is that parents go to the ends of the earth to hide this from everyone, from schools as well. And it's the same for children. They'll go to the end of the earth to hide it because they don't want to stick out and they don't want to be picked on and they don't want to feel different. So there's a lot of hiding, and that's why it's really, really useful for schools to help tackle that shame and bring the support that's available out into the open. You know, we don't want to put unnecessary pressure on any of you. We want to make sure that everyone's included. You know, tell us what we think. This is a whole school thing. There's nothing shameful about any of this. I think if you never talk about it, it remains shameful. I think this is one of the ways of creating these more just schools. I think more children and young people being able to be involved in creating that is quite powerful. Okay. The second reason there, it's about prioritising the right things. What the people affected are telling you what to focus on. The table here is an extract from a school action plan, and you can see really clearly that the issues have been identified by children and their parents. And you know, I don't think we've ever been in a school where, you know, there hasn't been some surprises or some new information that's come about by involving children and their parents. And finally, I think involving everyone means that when you're on the right track, you're bringing people along with you. I've seen schools kind of suddenly and you know, dramatically change trips policies, for example, because there's a trip to LA for, you know, £2,000 or something that nobody can afford, and that's brilliant and seems sensible. But if that groundwork and that involvement hasn't happened, then there can be real backlash from parents and from pupils as well, that can derail things, pit different groups of parents against each other. You know, if you suddenly cancel non-uniform days because they're affecting attendance, stop dressing up for World Book Day, all of these sort of things that are a good idea if you do it differently and have the same experience just in a different way. If it's come from absolutely nowhere, then you'll get the reactions in the second bullet point there of why are you ruining all the fun, when actually it's a way to make things more inclusive and make sure that everybody can join in on fun. So lots of brilliant ways to involve parents and children in this work and in the solutions, and it means that you bring people along with you. In terms of what the solutions are, it's so specific to each school. Could rhyme off, you know, 101 ways of what schools are doing about it, and interesting sort of approaches that people are taking. These are just a handful grabbed from some school action plans. And I suppose what's needed at the core of it is just a really clear understanding of the school community and how they're experiencing some of the things that I've mentioned today. And after that, it's questioning and adapting what's commonly done. Is there a different way to run that trip? Or can we apply for funding for travel costs for a club? You know, where do we sit with PEF? Is there PEF to subsidise that trip? Are our uniform suppliers providing best value for money? Let's try this idea to promote free meals in a different way. It's lots and lots of different things like that that can add up to a really big difference for families and for children. And I know that lots of you are from areas where maybe the schools in your area possibly don't receive a lot of PEF. And I would stress that lots of the solutions that children and young people talk about don't have to cost money. Lots of them do as well. I'm not saying that they don't if we're talking about travel and things like that. But actually, a lot of what they speak about is wanting understanding of their situations from the school and wanting consistency in the way that those things are dealt with. So there are ways to go about things that don't cost money. It's not just about individual actions. I'll mention in the next couple of slides a few sort of overarching good ideas that help to develop this work in schools, so that you don't have one or two disparate actions, but a bit of a cohesive approach that the whole school community is aware of. After auditing costs and thinking about affordability, a whole school annual financial calendar can be helpful to give everyone a clear picture of costs. A school policy or a position statement that's communicated to parents and to pupils. It's a clear message to children and parents that, this is important and here's how we can help. And actually embedding cost of the school day actions into improvement plans, improvement cycles, and showing how it's related to lots of other policies and agendas really, really helps to sustain it. Other kind of overarching approaches can focus on what the core problem is. It's about families not having enough money, and schools not having to be experts in welfare rights and kind of income maximisation, but putting things in place to be able to support families to get to those type of places. John was saying earlier, the point of education isn't to be able to put the role of education in this whole agenda isn't about putting pounds and pence in families' pockets, but actually some of these things here, making sure that a family are receiving free school meals, for example. If a child goes on to take that, that's a saving of about 450, 500 quid a year for a family. That's quite substantial. Getting families linked in with local welfare rights workers. There's a lot of unclaimed benefits. There can be a lot of money going back to the family. So there's a lot of different strategies that can be really helpful there. And really, I think where we want to get to, and where lots of schools have got to, I think, and you will know many of them, is that when anything is being planned, kind of financial impact on families becomes an automatic thing, like health and safety almost. £1, £100, it doesn't matter. What's going to be the impact here? And a huge part of that is about the messaging and is about the approach. The schools who do this best do it in a really open and matter-of-fact way. It's about acknowledging that shame and the reticence of people to bring it forward. It's not about sympathy, it's not about charity, it's about fairness and inclusion and making sure everyone can participate. This diagram, in a second, is very busy. But it's just from the evaluation that I mentioned of cost of the school day. And it's around how to sustain the work. And I'm not going to go through each of these things here. But just briefly, it mentions dedicated human resource to support schools. It needs people to look at it. It's not a huge investment of time within a school, it's not a huge investment of effort, but it does need someone looking at it. It doesn't happen organically if a school is in a place where these sort of things aren't recognised or aren't understood. It needs senior leadership and visibility, both at school level and at local authority level, if we're going to be talking about local authority-wide approaches to this. That visibility and that kind of leadership is really, really crucial. At its best, it needs local governance structures that make sure things happen and don't fall by the wayside. The education or children and families committees kind of hearing about the work that's going on in schools and local authority-wide approaches. And it needs as well, to avoid this kind of pockets of good practice happening in individual schools, it needs policy and practice change and attention to this agenda at local authority level as well, to support the work happening in schools. I'll point to the project that we work on with Dundee as an example of this. Not a perfect example, but a place where lots and lots of progress has been made in recent years. Due to that visibility and due to that leadership, I think, at local authority level for Cost of the School Day in this agenda. What we've done, we've worked in Dundee over the last 3 years, doing a variety of things, kind of action research with schools, training for staff, support for action plans, local practice networks, resources, lots and lots of different bits and pieces. And some of the things that have come from that are directed at, I suppose, setting expectations and giving support to schools from Dundee City Council. You can see on the left-hand side there, these are their 4 statements of intent. This is quite visible and ambitious statements of things that they want to see happening in Dundee and that they commit to happening in Dundee. Alongside those statements of intent, there's guidance for schools. There's slides at the first in-service of the year, alongside, here's your child protection slides, here's your this, the sort of HAFTA slides at the start of the year. Here's the situation with poverty in this city, and here are our expectations of how we approach that as schools. E-learning, input to newly qualified teachers, multi-agency steering group for the city. That link to elected members, those governance structures being there. Having kind of good news stories around things that schools are doing in this area, in local newspapers even. It sounds like a really silly, small thing, but actually it helps to embed that idea of this is happening, this is really good, this is positive. Including consideration of costs and what's being asked of families and the extent to which children on low incomes can participate, including that in the annual audit for schools, and being able to tackle kind of really city-wide issues, because there are things that come up that aren't tackleable by schools. If we're talking about maybe transport issues, or the way in which school meals are administered, or whether children can have their free meal allocation at break time instead of lunchtime, and all of these different things that need to come from the centre. That kind of local authority-wide approach and focus on this means that actually those sort of things can be looked at a lot more easily. What I'll just highlight finally, before I show you a wee film, is some resources to look at this, and it's useful. It was designed primarily for schools to look at it with their school staff, with parents, and with their children. But it's got lots of other background information for everyone else. It's hopefully useful just as a tool to take some of this forward, and you can see there, sorry, if you just flick forward, there's just some examples in the next few slides of some of the different resources in there. If you just keep clicking. Yeah, I won't go through all of these, it's just showing you the kinds of things that are in there, sort of available on our and just the next one again. That's it. It's available on our website. It's free, and we want as many people to use it as possible. Just ahead, the next one, and again, yes. And that's our website there, and there's an email address there. We've got the toolkit, that's the evaluation there. We've also got lots of different films that we've done in various different schools doing cost of the school day stuff that will hopefully be useful to get a bit of an idea there. We're trying to sort of build a bit of an ideas bank for this sort of thing. So if we can help or give any input to any of you at any point on any of this, then please do get in touch. The email address is just there. But just to finish, I'll show a wee film just in the next 10 minutes or so.